Good afternoon and welcome to our final bite size looking back on the Oxford Farming Conference's 7 decades. Our bite size series have given you all the opportunity to meet 7 of the 9 OFC volunteer directors, and each of these 7 to put together their own individual sessions, choosing themes from the history of OFC that they are all passionate about today. This month is no different, chaired by Andrew Pitts and re-exploring our theme from 2008. As you will have seen in range of both topic and speaker that we have encountered over the last 7 months, the Oxford Farming Conference is a broad and welcoming church with no agenda or manifesto beyond that to inform, challenge and inspire. We do not pitch one against the other, big ag versus small ag, regenerative versus mainstream, organic versus conventional, or intensive versus extensive. The Council of OFC have all come from diverse and varied backgrounds over the years: nutritionists, chief executives, dairy farmers like myself, journalists, black, white, heterosexual or homosexual, Welsh, Scottish, English, Northern Irish or British. We are all agriculture, and if we are to survive, this polarisation must end. We all farm and work to the best of our ability. We are all on a constant learning journey. Let's walk that path without castigating those who choose to walk it in a different way or from a different starting point. I'm delighted to now hand over to my fellow director, Andrew Pitts. Andrew is an arable farmer, amongst other things, in Northamptonshire, and I know today's subject is one he is very passionate about. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Sally. My subject today is the 2008 conference, A Climate of Change. And boy, have we got some change this year. No one could foresee what's happened in 2020. Forget the pandemic, but big weather events. We've had a whole new change in terms of Brexit happening in less than a month's time now. On Monday, we had George Eustice give us a new journey, a new roadmap for the future. So it is all change. But back in 2008, the subject was sustainability, animal welfare, producing good food at affordable prices. Hilary Benn, who was DEFRA Secretary then, spoke about rising prices, growing world population, climate change, pressure on land use. Nothing's changed since then. Neil Parish, MEP, spoke about the future of the CAP and world trade and balancing the priorities. World trade, exactly what Marion spoke about last month on our bite size. So I don't think Neil Parish knew in 2008, when he was talking about the future for 2020, that he'd be out of a job as an MEP. But today we're talking more about global warming and carbon. I have 3 fantastic speakers for you. We have Miles Allen from Oxford University, Richard Pywell from CEH, and Andrew Voicey from Soil Capital. So I'll start with introducing Miles Allen, Professor Miles Allen of Oxford University. He's head of Geosystems Science at Oxford University. His research is focused on how human and natural influences on climate contribute to observed climatic change and the risks of extreme weather. And extreme weather is something we suffer all the while. In agriculture, we're right at the coalface. So I'm now going to hand over to Miles to set the scene. Thank you.
Apologies. I just wanted to start by Sally's laughing at me. It's the usual mistake. You'd have thought I'd have worked it out by now. So I want to focus on a particular, probably fairly nerdy topic, but one which I think is very important to UK agriculture, very important to climate policy worldwide, and which is very topical right now because the government is in the process of developing the environmental land management scheme, which is to replace the CAP, the schemes that are to replace the CAP. And this is the topic of the impact of methane emissions on global warming, on climate change. First of all, so that everybody understands, methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. It does have a very substantial impact on climate. And indeed, rising methane emissions cause lots of warming. So it's at the moment, methane emissions globally are rising, and that is contributing very substantially to the increase in global temperatures. And it's very important that we reverse that trend. But the tools we have at the moment, and the tools that are standardly, conventionally used to measure impact on global climate get the impact of methane, to put it bluntly, they get it wrong. The reason is that stable methane emissions, if you keep methane emissions constant, they still cause some warming, but only about a quarter of what is implied by their conventional so-called carbon footprint. So if you go to a carbon footprint calculator and work out what your personal carbon footprint is, or the carbon footprint of your farm, there's a very good chance that if your farm is responsible for a stable generation of methane emissions, if you've got a stable herd, then its carbon footprint will be overstated by the conventional calculations. And it goes further. If you're reducing methane emissions gently, 10% over 30 years or so, then that implies no contribution to changing global temperatures. And if you're reducing methane emissions faster than that, you're actually drawing down global temperatures, having a similar impact to actively taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. Now, this has profound implications for the design of our environmental land management schemes. At the moment, the climate-related, what they call environmental immunity, is framed in terms of your farm's contributions to UK emissions, measured the conventional way using this so-called global warming potential, which, as I say, is not related to the impact of those emissions on global temperature. It seems to me to be, and it turns out to be, relatively straightforward to actually not do that, but actually to work out impact of emissions on global temperature. It seems to me to be relatively obvious that if we have a policy that's about global warming, the environmental immunity we should be talking about is impact on global temperature. This turns out to be surprisingly controversial. And it's certainly not agreed in government, there's plenty of opposition to the idea of changing from using the conventional carbon footprinting approach to using impact on global temperature to measure agriculture's impact. But I'm convinced a change that's going to come, because it doesn't make sense at the moment to continue to use a system of accounting for our impact on global temperature that for our impact on climate that doesn't actually reflect what we're trying to do, which is to stop global warming. So I just urge farmers to get their minds around this issue, because potentially this could be a make or break issue, particularly for ruminant farmers in the UK and Europe, as agriculture is brought in to climate policy. So, this schematic in front of you shows the impact of these different scenarios for methane emissions. There is huge potential for ruminant farmers helping control the rise in global temperatures, helping address global warming. But at the moment, we don't, at a very simple level, we don't have the accounting tools to measure that help. And that's something that I think we ought to rectify.
Thank you for that, Miles. That's a very interesting start. I'm going to move on now to Professor Richard Pywell. Richard is Head of Biodiversity Research at UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology. It's an independent, not-for-profit environmental research institute, and it's much underrated. Richard's a botanist by training and has over 25 years' experience in applied research into agricultural ecosystems. During this time, he's worked closely with farmers, us included, and the farming industry to help develop sustainable farming systems that are rich in wildlife. He's written a book I'd urge you to read called Habitat Creation and Management for Pollinators with Marek Nowakowski. And that, if you do that, you can make a hell of a difference to your farm really quickly. He currently leads the ASSIST project, which is Achieving Sustainable Agricultural Systems research program. It's a major government-funded research program to develop efficient and sustainable farming systems that are resilient to future climate change. And it's really important that we do that. So really pleased that you're able to join us, Richard. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. So yes, what are we going to need to do to achieve productive, net zero and biodiverse agriculture? And I think one of the most important things, and it really follows on from what Miles was saying, is We need to understand and identify the knowledge gaps. And once we do that, we need to monitor, measure, and trial. We need better information if we're going to make these changes. We also need to share our innovations. Farmers are practical people, great at solving problems. And if we can bring the science together with the innovations and the resourcefulness, we can co-design solutions to some of these problems. We can make major steps in achieving some of these things. We really should use the best of what new technologies can provide us: satellite, remote sensing, precision agriculture, the huge amounts of data that is available from the agricultural industry can all be utilized as part of this solution. And ultimately, what we really need to do is enable farming systems to become more efficient in the resources that they're using, in the fertilizers or the use of grass growth, more resilient to extreme weather and future climate shocks, and ultimately more sustainable. So they're the key things. And to help farmers achieve this, we need to provide them with tools to support better environmental management decision making, and also help them monitor the outcomes of what they're doing. So to actually see if they're achieving what's required. And on the right-hand side of the slide are a couple of these tools that we've developed under the Achieving Sustainable Agricultural Systems project. The first is called the Assist ePlanner, Environmental Planner. Could I have the next slide, please? Yeah, so the ePlanner is a free web-based tool that provides farmers with information, detailed environmental information on the relative suitability of different management options for the environment for every single field across Great Britain. All 2 million plus fields, there is detailed environmental information which is giving the relative suitability for a range of environmental management options, such as planting trees, creating flower-rich habitat for pollinators, protecting water resources, and sowing seed mixtures for wild birds. So this sort of information, these sorts of tools then need to be coupled with best practice advice and guidance, practical information for farmers. And Andrew very kindly mentioned habitat creation and management for pollinators, but there are many similar guides available to farmers. So we need to couple that to good practical advice. And then the next thing we need to think about, next slide please, is how can we help farmers monitor their progress? Miles mentioned the farm carbon tools, and they need to be improved, but they're a good step in the right direction. That farmers can start to account for greenhouse gases on their farms, very important. And also, when we've developed simple mobile phone apps to help farmers use image recognition and artificial intelligence to record the success of environmental management, the plant species that they've sown, and the pollinators and insects associated with those, to see whether they're achieving the desired outcome. So these sorts of tools are going to be very, very important going forward to achieve this net zero productive biodiverse agriculture. But it's very much about striking the balance between food production and delivery of ecosystem goods and services. So I think I'll leave it there. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, Richard. That was a very brief overview. Thank you. We're now going to move on to Andrew Voisey, and I'm really interested to see what Andrew has to say, because I think soil capital, the buying and selling of carbon credits and what have you, could be really valuable to the future profitability of many farm businesses, ours included. Andrew's background is his Soil Capital, and I'll start again. Andrew is from Soil Capital, an independent agronomy firm helping farmers to improve soil health and profitability hand in hand. And that, I think, is key to the success of farming changing climate change. Soil Capital recently launched Europe's first multinational carbon payment program for farmers, along with €500,000 of confirmed contracts from Biosec Carbon. So there's clearly a market out there. I'll hand over now to Andrew for his introduction. Thank you.
Many thanks, Andrew, and to you and Sally for creating this wonderful platform. So you've asked me to talk about selling it. And as you just said, Soil Capital is an independent agronomy firm focused on the intersection between soil health and profitability. We've got offices here in the UK and in Belgium. But what we've learned from our work right around the world is that although the practices that can help farmers to sequester more carbon in their soil are relatively well known now, the vast majority are still not ready to take the risk of adopting those practices, and they'll welcome an additional incentive to do so. Which is why, as you said, Andrew, we have worked to launch Europe's first multinational carbon payment program in September this year, with some buyer commitments that you summarized already confirmed. Just to give some context, that scheme is live today in France and Belgium, and it focuses on arable farmers, so a little different to Miles's focuses on livestock. And I'll happily obviously talk a little bit more about the detail of that as we go on, but just to give a broad overview, we are clear that there is plenty of room for improvement on the science. And that must be the case. We need those improvements, but we also know that there's enough knowledge to get started, and that farmers are going to benefit from having the additional technical, practical support that Richard just referred to, as well as financial support. And we've put in place various features of the design of our program to make sure it is as robust and credible as we can possibly make it based on what's available today, including using a carbon model, or greenhouse gas model, I should say, developed by a consortium of universities, including at the University of Oxford, where Miles is from. And about 150 farmers have enrolled in that program since it was launched at the end of September to date. So if you just go on to the next slide, please. I'm going to structure my few remarks here around those questions there. I've already answered the why me. Why did Andrew ask me to offer some thoughts, just with the quick summary I've given. So let me now just answer the question, is the market interest real? And I think this is a question that farmers often ask us. And the simple answer I would give is yes. The backdrop to this is maybe summarized by this phrase, race to zero, which really refers to a UN-driven process that is galvanizing companies, cities, regions, investors to all build off the Paris Climate Agreement and adopt net zero carbon targets themselves for their own operations and broader spheres of influence. And at the last official count in September this year, over 1,000 companies globally, nearly 500 cities, nearly 50 of the biggest investors in the world had made public net zero commitments to be delivered in the 2040s, so 20 years away. And just to give you a sense of scale, just focusing on those 1,000 companies in that group, that's a combined revenue of over $11 trillion, or more than half of the GDP of the United States. So, okay, they're all aiming for net zero in the 2040s. How does that become real for us and for the farming community? Well, the net point is key. Clearly, they're all going to, in theory anyway, work as hard as they can to reduce the emissions that they can control. But the likelihood is there'll always be some residual emissions where they look to others to help address those emissions. And in that category of removals, we can think of nature-based solutions that agriculture offers, and we can think of technological solutions as well. Microsoft this year, just to be really concrete, put out a tender to remove 1 million tons of CO2 equivalent from the atmosphere this year alone, this fiscal year, as part of its net zero strategy. So then let me answer this question 3. What does this mean for farming in particular? Because at the moment we're talking about high level commitments. I think the simple message is that in the near term, we're going to see more demand for carbon credits coming from agriculture than there is supply. And the reason I say that is that there is this emerging trend, I'm sure Richard and Miles will have views on this, rightly so, from these kinds of actors to prioritize climate actions that are quick and that can be delivered at scale quickly. And if you move on to the next slide, Goldman Sachs put out a report earlier this year, which started to elaborate on this thinking and identify that what might result is a sort of two-speed decarbonisation, where we begin to prioritise those quicker, lower cost, easier to scale options over the harder to achieve elements. And this chart on the right is looking at that category, that lower cost, easier to achieve category. And it's saying, look, of all the sectors, agriculture can contribute up to a fifth of solutions in that category. So there is going to be more and more attention from these kind of entities on agriculture being the answer to their residual emissions. And so if we go back to the Microsoft example, their 1 million tons, if they were to apply all of those removals in the UK alone, and if we took DEFRA's assumption on the average size of a farm and a conservative view of how much each farm can actually sequester in its soils, that could add up to something like 8,000 farms just to match the Microsoft commitment this year. And I hope that illustrates somehow the dynamic that we can see emerging here, where demand outstrips supply. If we just go back to the previous slide, I'll answer this fourth question: who will buy? I think the point I want to make here is that this is not just an offsetting story. And we know from our conversations with farmers in the UK and on the continent that some may be uncomfortable actually about the idea that they put in the hard graft to change practices, and then a company that is completely disconnected from their operations claims the credit. What we're starting to see emerge in our work is a number of food companies making commitments on what's called their scope 3 emissions, so all of the emissions in their supply chain, and then working with farmers in their supply chain to address those emissions. Companies like AB InBev, Cargill, Danone, Tate & Lyle, Arla, Kellogg, all sourcing from UK farmers, all have public scope 3 commitments. When we launched the scheme, we launched in September with 500,000 of corporate commitments already confirmed. One of those buyers was Cargill, and they are making the commitment to support their farmers, actually because they see interest in their own supply chain from their own customers to do so. Finally, if you could skip on forward 2 slides, please, just to keep you on your toes in the AV support. Thank you. I'll just close with some practicalities for farmers, because this is a new and emerging area. Richard spoke eloquently about the need for practical support, and Miles around some of the technical challenges that we still need to wrap our heads around. But this marketplace is going to raise at least 5 key topics that farmers will all need to be talking about. So number 1, should we be using external third-party standards in the design of our payment schemes, or should we do quick deals ourselves with local companies that are willing to move more quickly? Our personal view is that building a robust and stable market requires the use of strong third-party standards. Secondly, how are we going to measure impact? This, I suppose, is exactly on Miles's provocation at the beginning. But there's this broader debate between soil analysis and direct measurement in field, especially for arable farmers, versus the use of models, and where will we see those developments progress in the future. Thirdly, this topic of additionality. How do the actions that farmers are rewarded for complement what they are incentivized to do by public money? And fourthly, what is it that farmers will be required to do to prove that they have taken the actions that are claimed through various mechanisms, including the use of remote sensing technology hinted at by Richard? And last but not least, one of the key topics that buyers have when they look at agriculture is this issue of permanence. If we're talking about soil carbon sequestration, it's relatively easy to reverse the gains and release that carbon back into the atmosphere, which of course is completely contrary to the whole purpose of a scheme. Buyers need confidence that that won't be happening, and so we need to be looking at the incentives and the monitoring that will be in place to ensure that permanence is as robust as possible. I think all of this points to the question of, is this an endeavour to undertake on your own, or to join up with partners who've done some work, in some cases fairly detailed work, to try and wrap our heads around these points. And I think that's where I'll close for now.
Thank you, Andrew. That was fascinating. The developing market really interests me. I think it's a huge opportunity for farmers coming. Now, we've got 1 or 2 questions coming in already. I would encourage you all to ask questions. Sally will tell you exactly how to do so when I hand back to her now to ask the first question. But no, thank you for that overview. And I'll say back to Sally for the first question, please.
Yep, please keep your questions coming in. You can type them in the Q&A box and they will then be sent through to us to ask directly to our speakers. So the first question has been sent in from Rich Osborne. It is directed at Miles, but I actually think it's applicable for all our speakers today. And Richard says, thank you for your clear explanation of the impact of rising stable or falling methane. My question is, please could you outline the extent to which this explanation is debated or challengeable?
Well, the science is not debated. I think we know that this is how methane behaves. We've known for decades. What is still contested is essentially whether it would be, what do we want to measure? So some people argue, no, we should carry on measuring the traditional carbon footprint because that's what everybody's used to, and that's what our trading systems and so on are designed around. So there's considerable reluctance to switching to measuring warming footprint instead. So, I think it's fair to say that there's plenty of opposition to the change, but there's no real argument about the science. This is how methane behaves. We know that.
Would either Richard or Andrew like to add to that?
I'm happy to offer a brief comment. I mean, as I said earlier on, our focus at the moment is on arable farming, where methane plays a less significant role than livestock. The broader point I would make is that there are plenty of very important questions that still remain, whether it's on the science level, the level of science, or the level of getting these questions about permanence right and so on. And I think we know enough to get going. I think we've all sort of hinted at that in our various provocations to start with. But because those questions are important, and because we're all doing this for honourable reasons, the only thing that's left is to remain agile. We have to be open to changing our mind and improving and taking the best new thinking and incorporating that. So, I was triggered, Miles, by you saying that there's sort of resistance to move from one measurement system to another, and I can well understand that would be the case. But I think it's incumbent on all of us to be agile in responding to important new dynamics to this whole topic.
Thank you, Andrew. Richard?
I would agree with Andrew and Miles. I think the science, no one's disputing the science. I think it's a case of, we need to sort of catch the tools that are being rolled out need to sort of catch up a little with that thinking. And, but scientists also need to try and demystify some of this as well and get them into practical tools and ways of auditing. But I would agree the science is there. No one's disputing that.
How do we go about sorting out measuring? Because I've done 3 or 4 different carbon audits of our own farm business, and I've come up with very different figures all round. So when it comes to selling it, Andrew, how on earth do we go by the whichever particular carbon measuring tool your customer wants, or is there one system that you prefer? How is it going to be a commercial operation?
I think, Andrew, we found ourselves in a very similar position to you and to many farmers listening, which is that there's this range of quantification approaches out there today. Some are calculators and others rely on direct sampling from the soil and so on. And we found ourselves somewhat in the supermarket. We had to look around and make a decision for ourselves of what was the best available tool for our purposes right now. And for that, we have used a tool called the Cool Farm tool for now. It covers all greenhouse gases. One of the things that drew us to it was that it was developed by a consortium of universities, as I said, Oxford included, but a range of European universities, and is continuously improved by that consortium using the best available science from the IPCC and onwards. That doesn't mean it's perfect, but it does mean that there's this mechanism built into it for continuous improvement, which I think is essential. And in our case, we, for the time being, take that quantification tool as a given in the program that we take to market. We don't give buyers an option to use different tools, but we will reserve the right to improve that tool and support it, and indeed move and include other tools as they become more suitable as well.
Thank you. Did you want to add something to that, Miles?
Well, just briefly, I mean, the key thing about I'm not particularly talking about making things more accurate, in the sense it's more deciding what it is we're measuring. And that's really what the Cool Farm tool is perfectly accurate in terms of a way of measuring, or competitive with all the other ones, at least, as a way of measuring traditionally defined carbon footprint. The difficulty that ruminant farmers in particular face is that doesn't actually reflect impact on global temperature. So this is the bigger conversation we need to have. What are we trying to measure? And once we agree on that, then we can get into the nitty-gritty of how best to measure it.
So whose backside do we need to kick to get that decision made then, Miles?
Well, I the NFU have been doing quite a good job of raising this as an issue, but I think ultimately it's DEFRA. I mean, the UK Climate Change Committee, or they acknowledge the science, but they're still clinging to the old way of doing the accounting, which, if we're measuring our progress to a temperature goal, doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
As ever, legislation following on behind from science and not catching up. Thank you. Sally, next question, please.
Well, it slightly develops what Miles has introduced there. And I think the farmers are really asking, for all you want the specifics, Miles, on what should we be. I think farmers are quite happy to measure lots of things to then be able to narrow it down. And we've got Dave Robb asking, what are good and hopefully easy to use tools for farmers to engage in this, starting by measuring their current situation as a baseline and then finding the best opportunities. And John Posey is also asking, what is the best tool for measuring carbon in your soil, loss on ignition test, or are there more robust examples out there?
Okay, who wants to go with that one? Looks like Miles has got his microphone open, so we'll start with you, Miles.
Well, I should say this is a better one for Richard, actually.
Okay, Richard.
Well, I'll say that up from the outset, before my colleagues, my soil scientist colleagues, criticise me too much. I'm not a soil scientist, but my understanding is that soil carbon is not as easy as it may seem to measure, and certainly loss on ignition is measuring organic matter, and that isn't necessarily a stable carbon stock, and so soil carbon is relatively rarely measured by farmers because it's more expensive and it's not offered as a routine analysis. But it's something, technology is improving, and there are ways now of measuring soil carbon relatively accurately and for relatively low cost. And we need to get these widely rolled out and accepted so that we get more information on soil carbon stocks. And the other thing about soil carbon is people routinely just measure the surface, the top 15 to 20, 30 centimeters. And actually soil carbon stocks are actually deeper as well. And we need to take account of those. And so that's something my colleagues who are soil scientists often tell me, that we don't sample deeply enough and we're not necessarily measuring carbon. We're often measuring just organic matter. But I don't know if Miles or Andrew want to comment on that.
Yeah, I can come in and echo, Richard, many of the things you said. In particular, the world of technology is making some of the sort of centralized laboratory tests more accessible and affordable for farmers locally, which I think is very exciting. I think I'll just make two additional comments. One is, in any soil sample-based system, I think it's really important when we're rewarding farmers for things they've done or not, that we're able to disentangle natural variability of soil carbon through weather and climatic drivers from variability that's a result of practice change. Obviously, that can go both ways in terms of the benefits and disbenefits, but I think that disaggregation is important. And then maybe the other thing I would say, going back to the question, is that one of our observations when we designed the carbon scheme that we've launched is that actually there is this huge range of carbon calculators available to farmers. One of the problems that we see is that very often that information is not linked at all to productivity or profitability of farms, which ends up delivering information on the environmental impacts, even if it's asking the wrong questions, in a silo from the core drivers of productivity and profitability. So we tried to reconcile that by making a farm diagnostic tool that would actually bring all of that together, because we actually think that's key to how all farmers can and should make decisions.
That comes on nicely to you, Richard, and your measuring tool, your diagnostic tool, producing food and limiting any carbon damage in the productive areas, and in the less productive areas of the farm, then doing something more to capture carbon to help the ecosystems.
Absolutely, that's certainly one very effective way of striking the balance between sort of carbon capture, environmental benefit, and continuing to produce food. And it actually increases efficiency of resource use, because you're not putting fertilizer onto areas that you're losing money on, essentially. You're not obtaining an economic yield. Well, one thing, just to follow up on what Andrew said, another point about carbon is the baseline or the benchmark. What are you measuring from? What are you comparing it to? Because a lot of farmers have done a very good job of sort of managing their soils and increasing organic matter and carbon. And so if we said, right, today or tomorrow we're going to start measuring, they've already improved their soil significantly. So they haven't really got anywhere to go, if you see what I mean, in terms of improvement. And so if we were to sort of bring in some sort of scheme that rewarded farmers for carbon in soils, we'd have to think very, very carefully about how we would benchmark that and how would we baseline it. Where would you start measuring from? Because you could disadvantage farmers that have done a very good job, essentially.
That's interesting, that is. I'll come to you in a second, Miles. You had your hand up there. But in January at the Oxford Farming Conference, David Kennedy, who is Director General of DEFRA, was hit with exactly that question in a session I chaired, in that the work that had been done to improve ecosystems, birds, insects, soil. Then DEFRA was thinking that they wouldn't pay for what people had already got. They'd only pay for improvements. But when we pointed out to him very clearly that some people are a long way down this journey already, and they would be at a disadvantage, I literally said the question very simply to him: so does that mean I've got to plough up all my fields that I haven't ploughed for 14 years, release all that carbon to go back to square one? And he immediately said, no, that's not what we want at all. So I think there is some thought there in government, but we do need to keep our foot firmly on them to help that. Miles?
Just on the sort of calculator, I mean, my colleague Michelle Kane, who's recently moved to Cranfield, is working on, with in particular with the AgriCalc calculator, to include a global temperature impact output from it, not just your aggregate emissions. So, what's the impact of your farm on the world, rather than just the impact of your farm on nominal UK emissions. There's no question you're going to need both bits of information, as long as UK legislation is still defined in terms of traditional, carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. I think one thing which farmers could do is when you're buying or looking at output from one of these farm calculators, ask the people who make it, can you tell me what impact my farm is having on global temperature? And you can always refer them to us if they scratch their heads and don't know what you mean.
Andrew, could I come in on the point that you and Richard raised? I think it's such an important topic you've raised there, Richard, the maintenance point. Because most government schemes and most voluntary private sector market schemes simply don't have an answer to the question you've raised. And it's always bothered us knowing how easy in practical terms and frankly how tempting it can be to release that carbon and present yourself to a scheme as an emitter with low levels of soil carbon ready to take payment, as it were. And so we've worked hard on the answer to that question, and we actually do have in our scheme a way to reward maintenance based on various criteria. But I guess I just wanted to say, for a long time we thought this risk was somewhat hypothetical or theoretical. We knew it was totally possible, to Andrew's point, to go and plough your field to enter a scheme, but we didn't know of examples of farmers doing it. I had a conversation 2 weeks ago with another scheme that's emerged in Denmark, and the chief executive said, we don't have an answer to that question either. And one of the most high-profile regenerative farmers in Denmark recently phoned me up and said, not what do I have to do, should I plough, but I've just done it to enter your scheme. And suddenly it all became real. And those of us that know farming know that it's actually not unlikely to find those case studies. But I think it's extremely important that we give really careful thought to scheme design, whether it's government scheme or private sector scheme, to avoid that perverse outcome. It's madness.
Very much so, Miles.
And by the way, I mean, I think it's this perverse outcome that actually many people who, when I've been talking about sort of revising the way we measure the impact of ruminant agriculture on climate, much of the opposition to that arises from precisely fear of this same perverse outcome. Because if reducing your herd size actually draws down global temperatures, which it does. If your herd has always been large and you reduce it, then you are helping pull down global temperatures, just as if you were planting up a forest. But of course, the incentive, of course, is to inflate your herd size to something totally unsustainable, so that you can then reduce it and claim credit. So exactly the same problem arises. And so I think we need to grasp these problems. I think we need to design schemes to make sure that we don't incentivize that kind of unsustainable practice. But I don't think kidding ourselves about what we're actually doing is the way to do it. I think we just need to be upfront about this is the impact our farms are having, and look back. I'm sure Richard and Andrew would be better. You've got to look back over recent history to make sure that's not as part of the scheme. I'm sure Andrew does think about that kind of thing in the design of these in soil capital schemes, so as to make sure you're not just rewarding fixing last year's negative impact and claiming credit for it.
Thank you, Miles. Right, Sally, better go to some more questions.
Thank you. So I have a comment from Mike Gooding first, which is: sustainability is not just about carbon. Farming's value to society is much bigger than just carbon, and it is dangerous for agriculture to be judged just on carbon, which is followed up by a question from Sarah Mukherjee, which is there a danger that we start using carbon reduction as a proxy for environmental management when it's much more complicated? For example, the water involved in producing a pint of milk and a pint of almond drink.
That's a very good question. Who would like to go first with that one? Andrew, you've unmuted.
I'm sure we're all reaching for the unmute.
I thought so.
I don't need. Well, I'm very happy to go first. Richard, do you want to?
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, no, I think the premise of both of those questions, if I've been able to remember them properly, is exactly right. When we're Soil Capital acting as farm advisors, we don't at all focus squarely on carbon. We're looking at the full range of agronomic and soil health indicators, of which carbon is just one, as well as productivity and economic performance as well. The reason we focused on carbon is that what we've seen is that there are a bunch of barriers that prevent farmers from taking even more steps to restore soil health. Fear of loss, lack of confidence, but also a lack of market incentives. And, there's only so much we as a company can do to create those market incentives. But when we thought about it, the one thing we thought we could more easily reach for is the market's wider willingness to put a value on carbon. So that's really been our first step to try and bring new market incentives to farmers. But it shouldn't be interpreted as, from our point of view, the view is that it's all about carbon and nothing else. And certainly our farm diagnostic tool looks at a range of soil health indicators as well as greenhouse gas and profitability.
Thank you, Miles. Sorry, Richard.
Yes, I would agree. I think it's all about striking that balance between emissions, between biodiversity, water resource protection, all of these things. And don't forget, also continuing to produce food that's nutritious and sustainable production of that food. So, and employing lots of people as well. I mean, so there are many things that we need to achieve, and it is, but that's really where, the innovation and the design and the bringing everyone together to try and reach those solutions is so important, I believe. So I would absolutely agree with the points.
Miles, you want to comment?
I'll just say, obviously I agree. I mean, I'm a climate scientist, so climate is what I do. But don't, so just because I talk about it doesn't make it the only thing that's important. So obviously, yes, we need, but all the more reason why we need accurate ways of measuring our impact in all sorts of different areas, because we need to be able to compare them.
Thank you. Sally, next question, please.
So these are mainly directed at Andrew. I'm rolling 3 in, I'm afraid, so you'll just have to get your memory sharp for how you're going to answer these. So the first is a short answer from Joe Mitchell. If the UK agriculture wants to be carbon neutral, does the ag industry get first refusal on carbon credits to avoid double counting? And then William Croft Ailey is asking, what is the barrier to your carbon payment programme going live in the UK? And Hugh Martineau, can you please confirm that there are physical measurements to validate the Cool Farm Tool predictions of carbon stock changes before offering credits to the market?
Okay, a quick fire round. I'm not sure I fully understood the premise of the first question, Sally. But so what I took from it was, would UK agriculture, because of its goal to be net zero, be first in line for carbon credits? But I wasn't clear whether that was supplying carbon credits or purchasing carbon credits. Did that come through in the question at all?
I've read the question as written.
Yeah, okay.
I would assume that it's as in making sure we're not selling what we then need to claim our own net zero. Yeah, well, one of the this world of how you police the claims is an interesting one, and it's also an emerging and evolving one. There isn't a long history of market rules and regulations here, but one thing that is clear is, and it's quite an exciting opportunity from our point of view, is that when the buyer of a carbon credit is also buying the goods, so when the buyer and the farmer are in the same supply chain, then naturally, because the carbon or the greenhouse gas improvements are associated with those goods, then the claim can be shared through that chain. That is still a debated point in the greenhouse gas protocol worlds, but more from the point of view of how do we actually mechanize that, rather than should that principle be adopted. So we find that exciting, because also clearly from our point of view, finding ways for farmers to build more robust and value-adding relationships with the same customers that buy their crops, in particular I'm thinking about crops, makes sense. Barriers to us going live in the UK, really just a question of time. We plan to do that next season, certainly for arable farming. We need to adapt the protocol we have from a French-Belgian context to a UK context, taking a variety of UK-specific factors into mind. And physical measurements was the third question, Sally. Yes, the Cool Farm tool requires input on the local soil characteristics and local climate characteristics of a farm, including soil organic matter and so on for the farm in question. And we do, as part of our protocol, require soil analysis to verify what's input there.
Thank you very much, Andrew. All right, Sally, next question, please.
So this comes from an anonymous person. If we start putting a monetary value on carbon, does this mean consumers will have to start paying the real price for goods? Are there any estimates on what these increased costs might look like? And I'll add my own comment to that. It's interesting, Miles, you speak about reducing herd size, for example, as a way of cutting. And as a dairy farmer, I understand the theory, but when you refer it back to Richard's economies of scale and the actual productivity of a farm, that the two things don't marry up. So for me, also, if this is to be passed on to the consumer, how do we actually put a price on that? So I will back up Anon, and I promise I'm not the anonymous person in the first place.
Are you sure, Sally? Because that's a good question that would come from you. Well, we all know that cheap food has cost the earth. It's a very well-used statement. So, Miles, over to you.
Well, I mean, there's no. So, by the way, of course, I just used reduce herd size as one of the many ways in which farmers can reduce methane emissions. And you know, crucially, so one thing is we've slipped back into talking about carbon. Always talking about carbon, which is probably mostly fine for arable farms, but for ruminant farms, you've got to move on to talk about temperature. I mean, it's you know the notion of the carbon footprint of a ruminant farm is just a bit of a nonsense. So that said, if we were to quantify, to quantify the impact of UK ruminant farms on global temperatures, we'd find, because ruminant farming as a whole has actually reduced methane emissions modestly over the past few decades, its impact on global temperatures is pretty small. So in terms of putting a climate charge on it, it wouldn't be particularly, if you were imposing a financial charge based on impact on global temperature, then it wouldn't be a particularly substantial charge. In fact, if provided we can keep reducing emissions at roughly the rate we have been reducing them through vaccines, through better manure management, and so on, these various ways we have of reducing methane emissions, you know, you could make a strong argument that ruminant farming is climate neutral already, so to speak. But that said, of course, if we continue using the old way of accounting for everything in terms of the traditional carbon footprint, then ruminant farming looks like it's having a very negative impact. So, and if that was costed in at the full, you know, carbon price that is talked about in emission trading systems and so on, it would add quite substantially to food bills. I mean, that said, again, you know, there are opportunities there for ruminant farms to actually help with the climate problem by reducing methane emissions. But of course, what that will, I assume, mean is that we have a sort of a contraction towards quality, that would, of course, mean that maybe it doesn't make the individual products more expensive, but it means that we have a sort of a flight to high quality products, which are, of course, the higher quality, the more expensive products as well. Now I'm outside of my comfort zone. I can't talk about that kind of development.
Andrew, you'd like to say something?
Just briefly, I know we're short on time. To both parts of the anonymous question, will consumers pay more? I won't rehearse the whole argument about cheap food costing the earth, and maybe we all should be paying more. But what I would also observe is that 2, 3, 4 weeks ago, Waitrose put out a commitment to only source in the UK from net zero carbon farmers by 2035, I believe. And whether they're going to pass that cost or any cost on to their consumers, I don't know. But I think the first conclusion you can take from that move commercially is that Waitrose is seeing a strong commercial brand advantage to delivering to its customers what they expect. So maybe they'll be absorbing that cost. I don't know. I'm as Miles said, way out my comfort zone commenting on Waitrose's internal strategizing, but it may not be all about cost pass through. And the second half of the question about estimates of cost, plenty of good informed debate about what it should cost. all I can offer is the practical view today from our scheme in France and Belgium. So with the €500,000 of already committed purchasing, what we have committed to the farmers enrolling the 150 is that €27.50 per tonne is what they will be paid at a minimum. So we're sort of, fighting, if you like, for them to have a pretty strong minimum floor price out of all of this, so that we don't continue to undervalue greenhouse gas abatement and removal.
Sounds very interesting. That does.
Which is incredibly important.
Yes, it is, very much so. I think the food prices are a very political question, aren't they? Because no government wants to see food inflation. But as we're one of the third cheapest food in the world after America and Singapore, I think it is, and there are still people who can't afford it. That's down to an economic factor of wages not being enough for those lower paid people to be paid enough to afford a decent standard of living. And that's not down to farmers producing food more cheaply, because we'll just damage the environment more if we are forced down that route. So, Sally, possibly our final question.
This time it's from Tom Clark. Miles has argued fossil fuel companies should lead decarbonisation of fossil fuels. So to what extent would this make agriculture irrelevant in mitigating climate change? And what about sequestration?
Right, quick answer from Miles, please.
Well, at the moment, the land sector as a whole is contributing to climate change. If you sort of look at it in the large, as is agriculture, we've got to reverse that. Every sector's got to do its bit to get to net zero. And I think, the fossil fuel sector and the agricultural sector both need to step up.
Thank you. Would Richard or Andrew like to make a comment on there?
Yeah. Just to add, I think agriculture is in a fortunate position in some respects, that it has a great opportunity to address some of these issues, and also, and I'm sure Andrew will come in on this, to take on some of those sort of emission issues from other industries and make it part of their business.
Andrew.
I think it's dangerous to end on a note where we're talking about farmers taking on responsibility for other people's mess, but so I won't take that kind invitation, Richard. What I will say is that I think we all know that sequestering more carbon in farm soils, which is our focus, is actually fundamentally good for the health of farming and good for the health of farming businesses. So Miles is right, it's both and. All sectors need to pull their weight, but I don't really think that this conversation about who should take responsibility is the right energy from my point of view. There is good business sense if we can get the incentives and the support right for farmers to do this for themselves.
Yeah, I would see it as an opportunity rather than a responsibility.
Yeah, definitely. I see adding carbon to my farm, very big opportunity. Sally, have we got time for one final question?
I'm squeezing one in. So sorry, Andrew, if you thought you were going to have the last word, there's another one just getting squeezed in just now. This is from Andrew McCormick, and he is asking, if we start looking at having a climate charge, how do we deal with imports, as it could be climate damaging but cheap?
Miles.
I mean, we absolutely have to address the fact that we sort of move global warming around the world. We've done that in industry. It's going to start happening in agriculture. It doesn't help to bear down on your own emissions if the only consequence of doing that is that people source goods from abroad, which actually result in greater emissions. At the end of the day, the atmosphere doesn't care where the gas comes from. So this is about actually holding your politicians' feet to the fire and making sure that they actually set up systems to ensure that doesn't happen, that we don't export our environmental impact.
Thank you, Miles. I think I probably ought to draw it to a close as it's 1 o'clock. I've come away with 3 things. Thank you, gentlemen. You've done a brilliant job this morning. We've had some good questions there. 3 things I've come away from this are, to sum up, we need to measure and monitor before we can do anything. We've got to balance ecosystems and food productions, and they're obviously always a problem to work those out. But finally, the big question that we are left with is, what impact is our farm having on global warming? And that's the message I would like to leave with you as I hand back to Sally to close. Thank you very much indeed.
My turn, Miles, to not unmute. Thank you, Andrew, and reiterate your thanks to your panel. It's been really interesting. I find the whole climate change subject as a dairy farmer that is very fascinating, but also very complicated at times. So it's been really good hearing your perspectives. And Miles, I wasn't laughing at the beginning because, as I've just proved, you're not the only one who forgets to unmute. Thank you very much to our sponsors. As a charity, it would be impossible to run the Bite Size series celebrating 75 years of OFC without their support. Their logos are all displayed along the bottom of your screens. Thank you to you for joining us today, and indeed over the last 7 months as we have re-examined the themes over the history of the conference. Please stay on afterwards and network and chat to the rest of the delegates who have joined for today's session. Our next session is on the 17th of December, and we will be setting the scene for our conference, Business as Unusual. Over the last few months, we have looked at policy and business direction, but for me, COVID-19 has reminded me of the importance of our humanity and who we all are as individuals and what drives us. At OFC, we aim to inform, challenge, and inspire. We do this both through the speakers who present during the conference, but also by bringing you all together as delegates to forge new relationships, business and social, and to inform, challenge, and inspire each other with our own personal experiences and stories. The social side of conference is always fantastic fun, and I know I am not alone in missing the real-life human interaction that stimulates and challenges my own perspectives. So on the 17th of December, I will be in conversation with 3 exceptional individuals who have pushed themselves beyond their comfort zones and who have all become leaders in business, agriculture, and society at large. I will be joined by Kate Rowell, farmer and QMS chairman from Scotland, David Hill, estate manager and the greatest online ag show instigator from England, and Claire Jones, farmer and serial entrepreneur from Wales. This session will take place in the evening instead of our usual 12 p.m. slot, so please join me, ideally with a glass of wine or a beer in your hand, to reflect that social side of the Oxford Farming Conference and hear from these inspiring people. Hope to see you all there. Thank you.